Imagine a country folding in on itself, away from the global spotlight, where the sky is no longer a symbol of hope, but a source of constant terror. That is the grim reality in Myanmar today. For over 3 years, a devastating civil war has raged, pitting a desperate military junta against a highly motivated, fragmented coalition of ethnic armed organizations and civilian resistance forces. While the world looks elsewhere, the violence in regions like Rakhine and Shan State has reached an unprecedented scale, characterized by relentless junta airstrikes, shifting front lines, and a staggering humanitarian crisis. But to truly understand why this conflict persists, we have to look past the daily headlines and analyze the deep underlying strategic architecture driving both sides.
It really is a masterclass in complex conflict dynamics. If you look at this through a structured intelligence lens, you quickly realize this isn't just a chaotic brawl. It is a highly calculated, albeit brutal, game of survival and attrition. To make sense of it, we can apply several strategic frameworks, starting with what we call the MOST analysis, which looks at mission, objectives, strategies, and tactics. If you examine the military junta, their mission is absolute survival and the preservation of central military dominance. Their objective is to crush the opposition and retain control of key economic and administrative hubs. Their strategy relies on overwhelming, indiscriminate force, and their tactics have increasingly shifted to airstrikes, heavy artillery, and scorched earth campaigns to compensate for their massive losses on the ground.
And on the other side of the ledger, you have the resistance, particularly the ethnic armed groups like the Arakan Army in Rakhine and the Ta'ang National Liberation Army in Shan State. Their mission is self-determination and the dismantling of the military dictatorship. Their objectives are to seize territory, cut off the junta's trade routes, and establish localized governance. Strategically, they are cooperating in ways we have never seen before, using decentralized asymmetric warfare. Tactically, they are launching coordinated ground offensives, capturing military outposts, and utilizing commercial drones modified for combat. It is a fascinating clash of styles, which brings us directly to a SWOT analysis. What do the internal strengths and weaknesses look like for these opposing forces?
The junta's primary strength is its monopoly on heavy weaponry, specifically air power and armored assets supplied by external allies. However, their weaknesses are glaring and potentially fatal. They suffer from historically low morale, severe recruitment shortages, a total lack of domestic legitimacy, and shrinking territorial control. The resistance, conversely, possesses incredible strengths: high morale, deep local support, intimate knowledge of the rugged terrain, and unprecedented cross-ethnic coordination. But their weakness lies in their fragmentation. They are a coalition of diverse groups with different long-term political visions, and they face a severe lack of heavy anti-aircraft weaponry to counter the junta's aerial dominance.
That air superiority seems to be the junta's ultimate shield, but it comes at a terrible cost to civilians. The opportunities and threats here are incredibly stark. For the resistance, the opportunity is to completely sever the junta's economic lifelines, especially cross-border trade with China and India. But the threat is a prolonged, bloody stalemate, where the junta simply pulverizes liberated towns from the air, making them uninhabitable. This brings us to the broader systemic factors. If we run a pestle analysis, the political and economic collapse of Myanmar is staggering. Inflation is rampant, the formal economy has disintegrated, and the country is rapidly shifting toward a shadow economy driven by illicit trade.
Exactly, and the social cost is catastrophic. We are talking about millions of displaced people, a destroyed healthcare system, and a generation of youth whose education has been completely halted. From a technological standpoint, we're seeing a fascinating evolution where cheap, consumer-grade technology is being weaponized. The resistance is using 3D, printed components, and consumer drones to bypass the junta's traditional defenses. Legally and environmentally, the country is in a state of lawlessness, with rampant deforestation and unregulated mining funding the conflict.
It is a dark, complex picture, and it is exactly the kind of deep, multi-layered issue that we try to unpack here. Before we dive into how game theory explains this deadlock, let's take a quick moment to talk about what we do. This episode is brought to you by The New Sentinel. If you appreciate these kinds of rigorous deep dives into global security, or if you are interested in everything from the strategic intricacies of military operations to the fascinating dynamics of pop culture, The New Sentinel is your go-to podcast. Every week, we craft episodes designed to give you a comprehensive, thoughtful understanding of the world around us, featuring expert analysis and engaging storytelling. Whether you are a global security analyst, a history buff, or just someone who wants to stay genuinely informed, we have something for you. Please tune in, view, subscribe, and leave a comment to join the conversation. And if you are an entrepreneur looking to reach an engaged, intellectually curious audience, we can help you advertise your product or service right here on the show.
We would love to have you on board. Now, returning to Myanmar, if we apply the SPEAR framework, which stands for security, political, economic, academic or information, and regional factors, we can see how the external world influences this internal struggle. Regionally, neighboring countries are in an incredibly difficult position. China, for instance, wants stability on its border and protection for its economic corridors. But it also maintains ties with both the junta and certain ethnic armed groups in Shan State. This regional double game prevents any unified international intervention, leaving the conflict to burn in a vacuum.
That regional hesitation is crucial because it feeds directly into the mathematical logic of the conflict. Let's talk about game theory. When you look at the junta and the resistance coalition, why is there no negotiation? Why is a ceasefire seemingly impossible, even when the human cost is so devastatingly high?
Game theory provides a very clear, albeit chilling, explanation. We can model this as a non-cooperative, zero-sum game with incomplete information, closely resembling a classic war of attrition. In a standard game, players might seek a Nash equilibrium where both sides compromise to avoid mutual destruction. But here, the payoff matrix is heavily distorted by existential stakes. For the military junta, relinquishing power is not just a political defeat, it is an existential threat. They face immediate prosecution for war crimes, the loss of their vast wealth, and the complete dismantling of their institution. Therefore, their payoff for surrendering or compromising is essentially negative infinity.
Right. So for the junta, the rational move within their survival logic is to fight to the absolute bitter end, regardless of the cost to the nation. They are locked into a grim trigger strategy. And for the resistance, the math is similar. They have experienced decades of broken promises and military coups. They believe that any ceasefire would simply allow the military to regroup, rearm, and strike back later. For them, compromise equals eventual elimination.
Precisely. Because neither side can credibly commit to a peaceful agreement, the only logical equilibrium in their strategic calculation is to continue fighting. It is a tragic deadlock. The junta calculates that if they keep using terror and airstrikes, they can wear down the civilian population's will to support the resistance. The resistance calculates that if they can stretch the military's limited manpower across multiple fronts, the junta will eventually suffer a systemic collapse from within. Both sides are betting on the other cracking first, making negotiation a dominated strategy that neither will choose.
So the math of the conflict dictates that the violence must continue, and the civilians are the ones paying the price for this strategic equation. The airstrikes we see in Rakhine and Shan State aren't just military maneuvers. They are attempts to disrupt the resistance's governance and break the spirit of the people. But instead, it seems to be hardening their resolve, deepening the hatred for the regime, and making any future reconciliation almost unimaginable.
That is the ultimate tragedy of this game-theoretic trap. The very actions the junta takes to ensure its survival are destroying the state they wish to rule. Even if the junta wins, they will inherit a ruined, ungovernable wasteland. If the resistance wins, they face the monumental task of rebuilding a fractured nation from scratch, managing deep-seated ethnic rivalries that have only been temporarily set aside to fight a common enemy.
It forces us to ask a deeply philosophical question about the nature of sovereignty and conflict. When a state's military turns its most sophisticated weapons against its own citizens, does the state itself cease to exist in anything but name? Myanmar has become a cartographic entity without a cohesive national identity, a collection of fiefdoms locked in a permanent struggle for survival.
It really challenges the traditional Westphalian notion of a nation-state. What we are witnessing is the painful, violent deconstruction of a post-colonial state that was never truly unified. The future of Myanmar will likely not be a return to the status quo, nor will it be a simple transition to a unified democracy. It is more likely to evolve into a highly decentralized, perhaps confederated system, or a prolonged period of localized warlordism. The international community needs to move past the hope of a simple political settlement and start preparing for the reality of a highly fragmented region.
As we wrap up today's discussion, we are left with a sobering realization. The conflict in Myanmar is not just a localized tragedy, it is a preview of how modern civil wars are fought in an era of geopolitical fragmentation, cheap technology, and existential political stakes. The math of survival has overridden the human cost, leaving a nation suspended in a tragic equilibrium of violence. We must continue to watch, analyze, and remember the millions of lives caught in the gears of this relentless strategic machine. Thank you for listening to this episode of The New Sentinel. We hope this deep dive has given you a clearer perspective on a conflict too often left in the shadows. Don't forget to subscribe, leave your thoughts in the comments, and join us next time as we continue to unpack the complex forces shaping our world. Until then, keep questioning, keep analyzing, and stay informed.